Hey everyone, ready to dive into a topic we can all relate to. Today we're tackling time management. Let's be honest, who hasn't felt overwhelmed by their to-do list at some point?
It's a universal struggle, right? And it's not about fitting more into our already packed schedules.
Exactly. So, no pressure to suddenly become superhuman. Instead, we're going to explore practical strategies that can help us work smarter, not harder.
Exactly. We'll unpack some common myths about productivity and delve into research-backed techniques that can actually make a difference.
Speaking of myths, let's talk about multitasking. We've all been there, juggling emails, phone calls, that ever-growing to-do list, feeling like masters of efficiency. But is multitasking actually as effective as we think it is?
There's a common misconception that our brains are wired for that kind of rapid task switching.
Right, like we're these supercomputers that can seamlessly handle multiple demands at once.
Exactly. But the reality is a little different. Our brains actually function best when we focus on one thing at a time.
So more like a single processor computer trying to run a dozen programs simultaneously.
Huh. That's a great way to put it. When we constantly switch between tasks, we lose focus, make more errors, and ultimately feel more mentally exhausted.
Which is the opposite of what we're going for.
Exactly. So how do we break free from this cycle of multitasking madness and actually start conquering those to-do lists?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Well, one powerful strategy is breaking down those mammoth tasks into smaller, more manageable steps.
So instead of clean the entire house, which, let's be real, feels completely overwhelming, it's more like clean the kitchen, vacuum the living room, and so on.
Exactly. It might seem simple, but it taps into a fundamental principle of motivation. Small wins. Each time we check off a task, no matter how small, our brain releases a little burst of dopamine, which makes us feel good and motivates us to keep going.
It's like leveling up in a game, but for your real life.
I love that analogy. It's about creating a sense of progress and momentum.
Which makes total sense, because who wants to feel stuck at level 1 all day? Now, what about those tiny tasks that always seem to pile up? I'm talking quick emails, putting away a single dish instead of letting it become Mount Washmore in the sink. Those little things that seem insignificant on their own, but somehow snowball into this monster of procrastination.
You're describing the perfect scenario for the 2-minute rule.
2-minute rule. Tell us more.
It's incredibly simple. If something takes less than 2 minutes to do it now. Don't put it off. Don't add it to your to-do list. Just get it done.
So easy, yet so hard sometimes,
And
right?
it really is. But there's a powerful psychological mechanism at play here called activation energy.
Activation energy. Sounds intense.
It basically refers to the initial effort required to start a task.
Oh, I get it. Like that push to get out of bed in the morning. Once you're up, you're good. But that first step always feels the hardest.
Exactly. And those tiny tasks, they have such low activation energy that it's often easier to just do them right away than to think about doing them later.
It's like ripping off a Band-Aid, quick and mostly painless.
Precisely. And speaking of structure, let's shift gears to a technique that can be truly transformative: time blocking. Instead of letting your day control you, you proactively design it.
It's like giving your day a backbone, right? A framework to build upon. Instead of just reacting to emails, requests, and interruptions as they come up, you're intentionally allocating blocks of time for specific tasks.
You've got it. It's about taking control of your schedule instead of letting it control you.
That sounds amazing in theory, but I can imagine some people listening might be thinking, wait a minute, I'm already feeling like I have zero free time. How is adding more structure going to help?
Right. It might seem counterintuitive, but time blocking can actually be incredibly empowering for people who feel like they're constantly short on time. Why? Because by scheduling blocks for those essential tasks, work, email, even downtime, you regain a sense of control over your day.
Instead of feeling like you're constantly playing catch up, you're the architect of your day.
Precisely. And that can be a game changer in terms of reducing stress and increasing productivity.
Now, even with the best laid plans, there are times when we hit a wall, that feeling of overwhelm, like we're stuck in the mud.
Oh, absolutely. We've all been there, especially when we're tackling a big project or facing a daunting task list.
Exactly. It's like that initial burst of motivation starts to fade, and we're left feeling drained and uninspired.
Well, there's a technique we came across that directly addresses this, and it's called the Pomodoro Technique.
Pomodoro Technique. That's a fun name. Tell me more.
It's named after those cute little tomato-shaped kitchen timers.
Oh, I've seen those. So how does it work?
Basically, you set a timer for 25 minutes of focused work on a single task. No distractions, no multitasking. When the timer goes off, you take a 5-minute break. Then you repeat that cycle. After 4 Pomodoros, you take a longer break of 15 to 30 minutes.
So it's like interval training for your brain. Short bursts of intense focus followed by periods of rest.
Exactly. And those built-in breaks are crucial for preventing burnout and maintaining focus over longer periods. It's like giving your mind a chance to catch its breath and recharge before diving back in.
That makes a lot of sense. I can see how that would be helpful, especially for people who tend to get bogged down in long stretches of work.
Absolutely. It's all about working with your natural energy levels, not against them.
Now, let's talk about a mental hurdle that often trips us up: perfectionism. Our sources had some really interesting insights on this, like that quote about perfectionism being procrastination in a fancy hat.
Isn't that brilliant? It's so true, though. That desire to make everything perfect, especially in the early stages of a task, can be paralyzing.
Right, because we're so afraid of making a mistake that we end up not even starting.
And that's where the concept of good enough comes in. It's not about settling for mediocrity, but about shifting our mindset from it has to be perfect to done is better than perfect.
So it's about prioritizing progress over perfection.
Exactly. Remember, it's often easier to improve on something that exists than to endlessly tweak something that only lives in our heads.
Because you can always refine and polish later on, but you need that starting port first.
Precisely. And each time we finish a task, even if it's not flawless, we build momentum. We prove to ourselves that we can get things done, and that can be incredibly motivating.
It's like that feeling of accomplishment when you finally clean out that one junk drawer. It might not be glamorous, but it feels good to have it done.
Exactly. And that feeling of accomplishment is something we often undervalue. It's not just about checking things off a list. It's about building confidence and creating positive momentum in our lives.
Speaking of momentum, there's another aspect of time management we need to address: the power of saying no.
Ah, yes, the art of setting boundaries. It's crucial for effective time management, yet so many of us struggle with it.
It's like we're programmed to please, to say yes to every request, even if it means overcommitting ourselves and sacrificing our own well-being.
And that's where it's essential to remember that our time and energy are valuable resources. Every time we say yes to one thing, we're essentially saying no to something else.
Whether it's spending time with loved ones, pursuing personal interests, or simply taking a break to recharge.
Exactly. It's about making conscious choices about how we allocate our time rather than allowing it to be dictated by external demands.
So it's not about being selfish or saying no to everything, but about being mindful of our priorities and setting healthy boundaries.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And those boundaries might look different for everyone. For some, it might be blocking off time for family dinners each evening. For others, it might mean designating certain hours as work-free to focus on hobbies or personal projects.
Ultimately, it's about creating a life that aligns with our values and priorities, and that requires being intentional about where we direct our time and energy.
I couldn't agree more. It's about designing a life that feels fulfilling and sustainable, both personally and professionally.
It's about designing a life that truly reflects what matters most to us, right? Which leads us to a really important question. How do we actually put all of this into practice? We've covered so much ground today, from the myth of multitasking to the power of time blocking, the 2-minute rule, the Pomodoro Technique, and of course saying no.
It can definitely feel like a lot to process, especially when we're already feeling strapped for time.
Right.
Exactly. So it's not about trying to do everything at once, right? It's more about taking it one step at a time.
Exactly. Don't try to overhaul your entire life overnight. Start with one small change, one technique that resonates with you, and experiment with incorporating it into your daily routine. So instead of going from 0 to 60, maybe it's more like dipping your toes in the water first. Maybe you try the 2-minute rule for a week, or give the Pomodoro Technique a shot for a day.
Exactly. Think of it as a process of discovery, a chance to figure out what works best for you and your unique work style and lifestyle.
And be patient with yourself, right? It's like learning a new skill. It takes time and practice to get the hang of it.
Absolutely. And as you start experimenting with these techniques, pay attention to how they make you feel. Are you feeling more in control of your day, more energized, less stressed?
Those are great things to be mindful of. It's easy to get caught up in the mechanics of time management, but at the end of the day, it's really about how these tools can improve our overall well-being.
It's about working smarter, not harder. It's
Yeah.
about creating more space for the things that truly matter.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of time management, what's one key takeaway, one golden nugget of wisdom that you hope our listeners will carry with them?
You know, if there's one thing I want everyone to remember, it's this. Time is our most precious resource. It's limited. It's irreplaceable. And how we choose to spend our time ultimately shapes the course of our lives.
So powerful and so true.
So let's be intentional with our time. Let's use it wisely. And let's not be afraid to design a life that truly reflects our values and priorities.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. What one small step can you take today to start reclaiming your time and designing a day that brings you closer to your goals? Until next time, keep exploring, keep experimenting, and keep diving deep.